I almost evicted my tenant for violating her lease, then she told us what was actually happening in that house. I want to start by saying that I have never considered myself a suspicious person. I am organized, practical, moderately risk-averse, the kind of person who reads the full terms and conditions before signing anything and keeps a spreadsheet for monthly expenses. My husband Marcus calls it my superpower and my personality flaw simultaneously, and he is probably right on both counts. I do not spiral. I do not catastrophize. I gather information and I make decisions based on what the information actually says rather than what I am afraid it might mean. I tell you this because what happened over the 14 months that Renee Okafor lived in our rental property is not the story of a paranoid landlord who invented problems where none existed. It is the story of a woman who gathered information carefully and methodically for over a year and still somehow managed to miss the most important thing until it was almost too late. Marcus and I bought the rental property 6 years ago. A 2-bedroom house 3 miles from our own home, modest but well-maintained, in a neighborhood that was steady if not exciting. We were not real estate investors in any grand sense. It had been Marcus's idea originally, a way to build something outside of our salaries, a long game, a thing we could point to in 20 years and feel we had been smart about. I had done the spreadsheets. The numbers made sense. We bought it, made a few updates, and rented it out to a series of tenants who were, with one minor exception involving a broken fence and some dispute about whether it constituted normal wear and tear, entirely unremarkable. We were not the kind of landlords who turned up unannounced or itemized every light bulb. We fixed things when they needed fixing, deposited the rent when it arrived, and otherwise left people to live their lives in peace. Renee came to us through a rental agency. Her application was clean, solid employment history, good references, credit score that sat comfortably above our minimum threshold. She was 38, a project manager at a logistics company, recently relocated from another city following a divorce she disclosed unprompted on the application with a brief, professional note explaining that her previous rental history was in her former married name. I appreciated the transparency. We approved her within the week. She moved in on a Saturday in March and sent a brief, polite email that evening saying the house was lovely and that she was very happy to be there. For the first 4 months she was a model tenant. Rent arrived on the first of every month without fail. She emailed once about a slow drain in the bathroom and once about a window latch that had stiffened with the cold. Both times the message was clear and courteous and she expressed no urgency beyond what the situation warranted. When Marcus went to fix the window latch she offered him coffee and they talked for 20 minutes about the neighborhood and she sent a follow-up email afterward thanking him for his time. He came home saying she seemed like a genuinely nice person and I agreed based on everything I had seen. The first thing that registered as unusual was small enough that I almost filed it away as nothing. I drove past the property on a Thursday afternoon in July, not for any reason, just passing through on the way back from an errand, and noticed a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. This was not a problem. Tenants have visitors. The lease did not restrict guests and I had no reason to think anything of it. What made me notice was that the car was there again the following Thursday. And the Thursday after that. Same car, same spot, same approximate time of the afternoon. I noted it without acting on it and moved on. The second thing was a neighbor. Her name was Pauline, an older woman who had lived on that street for 30 years and who had, over the course of various tenant turnovers, developed a cordial habit of occasionally texting me with updates she felt I should have. I had always taken these in the spirit they were intended, neighborly observation rather than complaint, and had never found them to be anything other than accurate. In August she texted me to say that she thought I should know there seemed to be quite a few different people coming and going from the property at varying hours and that she did not want to cause trouble but wanted me to be aware. I thanked her and told her I would look into it. I mentioned it to Marcus that evening. He said it was probably nothing, that Renee seemed like a social person, that people had friends and visitors and that Pauline's definition of quite a few might be different from ours. He was not dismissive exactly. He was balanced in the way he usually is, which I appreciate and which occasionally frustrates me when I am already leaning toward a conclusion. I said he was probably right. I let it sit for 2 more weeks. Then I called the rental agency and asked them to conduct a routine inspection. We were entitled to 1 per quarter with appropriate notice and we had not used our July inspection. They scheduled it for the first week of September. The inspection report came back with 3 items. A small patch of damp under the kitchen sink that needed monitoring, a crack in the grout along the main bathroom tiles that was cosmetic but worth noting. And a third item that the inspector had flagged with a question mark and a note that said, second bedroom appears to be in regular residential use, recommend landlord clarify occupancy terms with tenant. I read that 3 times. The lease was for a single occupant. Renee had applied as a single occupant. The property was listed and priced for single occupancy. If someone was living in that second bedroom on a regular basis, that was a material breach of the lease terms and I needed to understand what was happening before I decided what to do about it. I drafted an email to Renee. I rewrote it 4 times over 2 days, each version adjusting the tone between too formal and too casual, between accusatory and naive. What I finally sent was straightforward. I mentioned that our routine inspection had flagged a question about occupancy and that I wanted to check in directly before drawing any conclusions. I said I valued her as a tenant and that I simply needed to understand the current situation in the property so that we could make sure everyone was on the right page going forward. I asked her to call me at her convenience. She called the next evening. She was calm. She explained that her daughter had come to stay for a few weeks following some difficulties at university and that she had perhaps overstayed the original plan but that it was a temporary family situation that she expected to resolve within the month. She apologized for not notifying us sooner and said she should have been upfront about it. She was so reasonable and so composed that I found myself thanking her for the explanation and telling her I appreciated her honesty and that we would give it another few weeks and check in again. I got off the phone and Marcus said that sounded completely reasonable and I agreed and we went back to our evening. The daughter was still there 2 months later. I want to be honest about the next part because it reflects something about me that I am not entirely comfortable with. Instead of following up directly when the agreed timeframe passed, I waited. Not passively, I was aware of it, I had it on my mental list, I had even drafted a follow-up email twice, but I kept finding reasons to give it more time. The rent was still arriving on the 1st. The property was being maintained. Nothing was on fire. And there was something about Renee's composure and reasonableness that made me reluctant to be the one to press. She had handled every interaction with such straightforward professionalism that confronting her about the daughter felt somehow petty in a way I could not fully justify but could not entirely shake. My therapist, if I had one at the time, would have recognized this immediately as the same conflict aversion I have spent years trying to address. I did not have a therapist at the time. I had a spreadsheet and a growing unease I was choosing not to fully examine. Pauline texted again in November. She said the late-night activity had increased and that there appeared to be more than one additional person on the property on a regular basis and that she was not trying to make trouble but that she had lived on this street for 30 years and something felt different. I thanked her again and this time I did not wait 2 weeks. I asked the agency for another inspection. The inspector went in on a Tuesday morning in December. She called me while she was still on the property. She said she needed me to know that the house was clean and undamaged and that Renee had been present and cooperative throughout. She also said that in her professional opinion the property was currently housing more than one additional occupant. The second bedroom had been divided with a freestanding partition. There were 2 sets of bedding, 2 separate arrangements of personal items, and evidence of regular use by more than one person. The living room showed signs of being used as an additional sleeping space in the evenings. Her estimate, based on what she observed, was that there were likely 3 to 4 people living in a property leased to one. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office and stared at the dashboard for a long time. I called Marcus. He was quiet while I told him. Then he said we needed to find out what was actually going on before we did anything else. Not in the soft, let's give it time way from before. In the way he gets when something has moved past the point where patience is a virtue and become the point where inaction is a choice. I emailed Renee that evening asking for a meeting at the property. I said I had received the inspection report and needed to discuss the findings in person. I kept the email short and I did not apologize for anything in it. She responded within the hour confirming a time for the following Saturday morning. I want to tell you what I expected to find and what I actually found because the difference between the two things is the center of this entire story. I expected to find a tenant who had allowed her living situation to drift beyond what the lease permitted and who would either negotiate a revised arrangement or be asked to leave. I expected an uncomfortable but manageable conversation between 2 adults about contractual obligations and reasonable remedies. I expected to feel like a landlord having a difficult but necessary professional conversation. I expected to feel, if anything, slightly guilty about it. I did not expect what I found. Renee met us at the door and brought us into the kitchen and offered us coffee in the same composed, professional way she did everything. Then she sat down across from us and said she wanted to be honest with us before we said anything. She said she had been trying to find the right moment for several months and that she was sorry she had not found it sooner. What she told us over the next 40 minutes I have not shared with anyone except Marcus and one close friend who I trust completely. Renee's daughter was 22. She had left university not because of the difficulties Renee had described but because she had left a relationship that had become dangerous. The kind of dangerous that involves police reports and restraining orders and the particular terror of not knowing whether the piece of paper you have been given will actually keep you safe. She had come to her mother. Renee had taken her in. 2 of the other people in the property were women her daughter had met through a support organization, women in similar situations who had needed somewhere safe to stay for weeks at a time while longer-term arrangements were found. Renee had been quietly providing that. Not as a business. Not for money. Because she had a 2-bedroom house with space in it and she had once been, years before her divorce, in a situation that rhymed with the ones these women were in, and she had told herself a long time ago that if she ever had the means to help she would not be the person who didn't. She said she knew she had violated the lease. She said she was not asking us to ignore that. She said she had a plan to find her daughter a permanent arrangement within 60 days and that the other women cycled through for short periods and that she would understand completely if we needed to end the tenancy. She said she was sorry for not telling us sooner and that she had told herself she would find the right way to explain it and had kept not finding it and that had been wrong of her. Marcus and I sat in that kitchen for a long time after she finished. I thought about the inspection report. I thought about Pauline's texts. I thought about the spreadsheet I had built 6 years ago about risk and return and the clean, manageable math of being a landlord who asked nothing more complicated of a tenant than that they pay on time and maintain the property. I thought about the fact that Renee had done both of those things without fail for 14 months while quietly doing something else entirely in the rooms I owned. Marcus asked one question. He asked if the women who stayed were safe. Renee said she did everything she could to make sure they were. She said her daughter's situation had stabilized. She said the restraining order was holding. Marcus looked at me. I looked at him. We have been married for 11 years and there are conversations we have without speaking that are as complete as any we have had out loud. We told Renee we needed a few days to think. We talked for most of that evening and into the night. We talked about liability and insurance and what our obligations were as landlords and what they were as people and whether those two things could be separated as cleanly as we had always assumed they could. We talked about what the lease said and what the law required and what we would want someone to do if the situation were reversed and someone we loved needed somewhere safe to land. We went back to Renee the following Tuesday. We told her that we were not going to end the tenancy. We told her that we needed the arrangement to be transparent going forward and that we wanted to understand who was in the property and for how long on an ongoing basis. We told her that our insurance situation required us to make some adjustments and that we would handle those adjustments ourselves rather than passing them to her. We drew up an amended agreement that reflected the actual situation rather than the fictional one and we all signed it and that was that. Her daughter found a permanent arrangement 8 weeks later. She came by the house the day she moved out to say thank you and she shook my hand with both of hers in a way I still think about sometimes. The women who cycled through continued for another 4 months and then that chapter of things closed on its own as Renee's involvement with the support organization shifted from housing to other forms of help that did not require our property. Renee still lives in that house. Rent arrives on the 1st of every month. Pauline texted me last spring to say the new garden furniture Renee had put on the front porch was very tasteful. I responded with a thank you and a smiley face and did not elaborate. I have thought about those 14 months many times since. About how close I came, at several points, to handling it entirely differently. About how the spreadsheet logic of landlord and tenant and contractual obligation had almost been the whole story when it was in fact the smallest part of it. About how Renee had sat across from us in that kitchen with 14 months of careful silence and told us the truth the moment we actually asked for it directly and how different that conversation might have gone if we had led with the lease instead of with a question. I do not think I am a different person because of it. But I think I am a slightly less certain one. And I have come to believe, slowly and with some resistance, that slightly less certain is often closer to right. I do not have a question. I just needed to write it down somewhere outside of myself. If you have ever found out that someone you almost judged had a reason you could not have predicted, I would genuinely like to hear about it.